Hi, my name is Chetan Walia. Welcome to this webinar on strategy. It's an important topic today because we are at a moment in time in history where we on the midway of this pandemic that's engulfed the entire world, and I believe it's a midway. I still believe it's about 6 months to go. And it's amazing how you would interact with businesses, and almost every business that you interact with would kind of assume that they're being highly strategic in nature, not just in these times, but in any regular times as well. You go and you interview a business owner or a leader, they'll take pride in their business strategy. Yet statistics tell us, right, and it's an intriguing one, that 97% of all established businesses in the world are purely tactical and not strategic. Tactical means that they take life as it goes and they respond to situations, and of course when you're responding to situations, you might believe that you're taking strategic calls, but science tells us that that's actually just a tactical call. That's not being strategic in nature. And in the middle of this crisis, where we're almost 50% through, where the economy is looking uncertain and the worldwide markets have taken a beating, we're at a time where businesses increasingly, and I've been saying this for the last 6 months, businesses increasingly have got into a preservation mode. And I believe that it's absolutely crucial, and we're at that time, we're at that juncture where preservation is fine, but businesses now, to be able to survive or thrive or grow, actually need to be able to pivot from this reality and create a new one. Because whether or not Corona lasts for a longer time or not, the way business will be done has changed for sure. Right? It's not that the pandemic goes away and life comes back to pre-2020. It's at least 4 years away where the same levels of growth are to be seen again in a worldwide model. However, for specific micro-level businesses, it can come if they develop the ability to strategically pivot. And that was my motivation behind creating this live cast today, so that we are able to provide you a framework, whether you're a professional, whether you're a business owner, or whether you are watching this out of purely self-interest, to be able to apply it to your life. My aim here today is to give you a model and a framework that you are able to use, apply immediately tomorrow morning, and that framework should be able to guide you to actually be pivoting rather than preserving. Think about it in terms of a sports analogy, right? When you have a team that's just playing to survive, or that's not playing to win, what happens to that team in the sports match? Unless it's some big dash stroke of luck, the team's destined to lose. Unless a business is playing to win. If a business is playing purely to survive, what will happen to it? It might survive, it might not survive, it surely isn't winning the game. And the objective of strategy essentially for ages has been to be able to enable you to win, to be enable markets to win, to be enable you to grow, to get certain strategic upsides and advantages and competitive advantages that gives you a pivot into the future. And that's what strategy is supposed to do. I think where businesses went wrong at the beginning of the pandemic, and predictably so, everyone wants to survive and they wanted to survive and preserve what exists rather than think of a growth. But I think where that strategy itself, or that tactic itself, has gone wrong is the assumptions made during that time was that it's about 30 days or 60 days or 90 days, but it's not. I think businesses didn't have the foresight to see that this is going to change the world for good. And if it's going to change the world for good, then 30, 60-day strategies really don't help, because it only gives you survival for that much period of time. I would stress again before I delve into this presentation, the moment is here for businesses to pivot, for individuals to get proactive about things so they are able to pivot, for small communities and families to get out of this rut and create some proactive action so that you're able to pivot and adjust to the new reality. It's like a 360-degree circle. You've been living in this space for a long time. It's time to turn it around, face the reality, and come up with actions that work in the new economy. And that's the objective behind this presentation today on how to be effective overall as strategy. My aim is today to give you 2 frameworks for this, and within those frameworks, post I have introduced them here in this presentation today, we'll be taking all your questions and answers. So let's get started right away. And the first point on strategy that I want to really make is this: nobody really knows what a strategy is. Economists wrote this about 25 years ago today, and it's still so true for today's world that nobody really knows what strategy is. And it's exemplified by the fact that there are so many definitions and there's so many interpretations of those definitions of what strategy really is. Strategy is sometimes considered to be a plan, it's considered to be a ploy to outmaneuver the competition, it's considered to be a pattern or actions that, whether intended or not, are still emergent in nature. Strategy is considered as a positioning statement, as a popular form of at least marketing strategy that goes around. And of course, strategy is considered to be a perspective or a foresight. A lot of firms misconstrue strategy, for example, with vision and mission statements. Let me take you through to two examples which will highlight this point as to how different companies understand strategy differently. Long ago, there used to be this case study on Schlitz beer. There was a beer manufacturing company who hired a marketing consultant. It's a fairly popular story. Who visited their breweries and saw the kind of process that they conducted while manufacturing the beer. So the Schlitz manufacturing process was that the brewery had 3 or 4 different distillery processes to take out the most purified beer that could be. They had different infrastructure and all of that. And this guy entering a beer factory for the first time was really enamored and said, your strategy is very simple. You are doing so many routines and checks that all you need to do is go to the customer and tell them that this is your process and that's how you take out the purest beer in the world. And the owner of Schlitz Beer turned around and said to this marketing consultant, hey, you've got it all wrong because everybody in the world manufactures the beer this way. The marketing consultant looked back in the owner and said, sir, everybody might be manufacturing in this way, but the drinker doesn't know that. And if you're the first one to go to the market and say that, you're in a unique position and others will look like that they are copying you. Sounds absurd, but that strategy worked. Schlitz Beer, from being somewhere number 12 or 13 in the industry, was right up to the top 2 beers in the world within 2 years of following that strategy. Now that's a classic example of a ploy or a positioning statement. Kellogg's, for example, during the Depression of 1929, upped their marketing budgets to unknown levels. They curtailed every expense and increased marketing expense because they thought that pandemics like today or recessionary periods are great opportunities to transfer market share because everyone is just sitting back on their seat waiting for things to happen. That strategy worked wonderfully for them. The results show for itself. Now, these companies, of course, may well believe, and rightly so, that these are strategic in nature, but the point being that different realities force different organizations to think of strategy as either a plan or a ploy or a pattern. The most common strategic definitions that you would find today in a boardroom would be around making sales projections or business projections or profit projections, create a 5-year plan, now figure out what we need to do. That's a planning exercise, probably the most popular form of strategic exercise that exists. Mintzberg, who researched strategy from 10 different schools' perspective and gave us all these definitions, found in practice strategy to be like the story of blind men trying to describe an elephant, where someone's touching the trunk of the elephant and someone's touching the tail and someone's touching the tusker and defining different things. And that, he said, was like a process of strategy because everyone's described strategy based on their convenience and not based on what actually is. And in the process, he gave us 10 schools of strategy. He said strategy is considered in a prescriptive nature at a very, very macro level as a design, as planning or positioning, and at a descriptive level, that is what enables an organization to actually implement this strategy, is considered some sort of a configuration or a cultural journey or an entrepreneurial insight dependent on environment, based on certain learning and development, and essentially aimed at giving them some sort of power or control. So as you can see, strategy has various connotations and various definitions. Not all of them are wrong. We are not intending that, but all of them might not essentially be strategic. You could have planning, you could have ploys, you could have patterns, you could have perspective, and you could still lack a strategy which is holistic enough to identify and create the change that you really want. A lot of strategy emerges in hindsight. If you take a look at this slide, there is an intended plan of action which an organization largely refers to as its overarching vision or goal statement, and then they create some sort of a deliberate strategy sitting in a retreat somewhere, and then it's supposed to be the actual realized strategy. But what happens in the process of execution, the firm or the organization or people realize that their goals haven't been fully realized, and a lot of action starts to emerge as a result of it. These unrealized goals in an organization become the default problem statements which an organization spends all its energy in solving. Very quickly, in that act rush of doing things, they forget what the actual strategy was about, and there in fact is an emergent strategy which may or may not take them to goals. What is important to remember, a lot of what we read as strategy or strategic brilliant moments in people's lives and careers are actually a study in hindsight. It's not as if they set out for that strategy and reached there. A lot of strategic science itself is derived in hindsight, and that creates in front of us a great problem because it hampers us even more to know what actually strategy really is. And in the absence of knowing that, what emerges is that in this whole process of strategy setting and execution, which we follow by default, there is no coherent whole. You see, thinking of strategy in this manner denies the existence of the holistic approach that actually leads to possibilities. There is no coherent whole means this. Strategic innovation can today take third-rate companies and transform them into industry leadership, and it can also take the giants and established industry leaders and completely destroy them. Examples are there in the history of giants as Kodia and Nokia and Blackberries of the world, or even the most established of firms in the manufacturing sector which do not exist anymore. And the reason is not that they didn't have strategic capability or that they thought they were unstrategic about business. The reason is actually that they were perfectly strategic in their head, but they were not holistic about it. And I think a critical distinction about strategy today is to understand that strategy is about making choices. Think of choices for a minute. Think of strategy as making a choice. Let's say you were able to live in any part of the world that you wish to. You choose a certain environment to live in. You take certain actions within that environment, and there is your end result. But it was a result of a choice you made. Let's say it's a choice between what you want to eat. You put certain things in your body, you make certain choices at a daily level on your physical fitness and stuff, and in the end you get an end result. You're making a deliberate choice. Or think of it in business terms. Business decides to focus on certain things or decides not to do certain things, decides to run with a certain set of people, decides to pursue a certain set of culture, decides to create a certain set of environment, and in the end it gets an end result that whether is it in liking with it, what it desired or not, but that's the end result. And that is determined by a set of choices. And in our view, strategy is about making choices. Strategy is essentially a set of choices you make now to direct the future in order to increase the probability that you will win now and into the future. So strategy really is a matter of choice. It's a choice that businesses make, and I don't think the strategy as a choice sits into the minds of strategists as much as financial projections and plan does. Sure enough, that's a part of strategy and needs to be done. It's a hygiene check. But in the process of deciding the plans and figures and processes and whatnot, businesses are actively, constantly making a choice on what to do, on what not to do. The decisions that you're taking are a choice. The decisions that you're not taking are also a choice. The people that you are persevering with is a choice. The people that you're deciding not to persevere with is a choice. The culture that you have in your environment is a choice. The one that you don't have and that you might even like to but are not doing anything about it is also a choice. Strategy is not just about your visions and goals and missions and pretty looking pictures and value statements. Strategy, the end result of a strategy, the end result of a business direction, the end result of achieving a goal or not is in fact a matter of pure choice. And I would like you to go back to the definition again, that strategy is a set of choices then that we make right now to direct the overall picture for tomorrow, obviously aimed at increasing the probability that we win now and into the future. Strategy is a choice. And these are the 5 choices that a business makes. So these are the 5 characteristics of the choices that emerge before a business. Strategy is business focused. Now what that means is this, that of course strategy has to achieve a business result if you're in an organization, that it has to be talking about the overall health of a business and what goals you are set out to achieve. But the second point has to be clubbed with the first one, that strategy is about human beings. Now whether you are an individual or whether you are a business or whether you are a large enterprise, Get this into your mind ingrained that there is no scale in your business that's ever going to be possible. There's no scale in your life that's ever going to be possible. And at a personal level, there's no scale in your personal goals that are ever going to be possible without other human beings. Scale is a direct proportion of you investing in and working with the right talent and grooming them the right way. No matter what your business is, it will hit a bottleneck either in capability or in potential, and both of them are directly related to just the human being. The third point is that it's a rigorous process that challenges assumptions. Now, strategy is a rigorous process, that's well understood, but strategy as a process continuously needs to challenge assumptions. Strategy is not fixed in stone. It needs to be as flexible as anything in life, and a critical element of strategy is that it needs to establish the assumptions that you are making while making the strategy itself. Now, this is not normal practice. Organizations set out a strategy, they set out a 5-year projection plan, but they don't even for a moment enlist the assumptions that they're making. For example, the assumption could be that you're assuming the economy is going to grow this much. The assumption could be about the market, about the geography, about consumer behavior, about industry behavior, about world behavior, about availability of supplies, raw material, whatever the assumptions are. There are underwritten assumptions that are leading you to make a certain projection, and strategy itself needs to be a process of critically examining assumptions, because when the results go wrong, it's not that what you decided in your boardroom a year back was wrong. It is because one of those assumptions hasn't held true. And if you knew the assumption when the results go wrong, it's an easy fix rather than reconfiguring the entire strategy. The fourth point, and I will delve into it towards the latter part of the presentation, strategy is a creative process. What you are strategizing for today does not exist. So essentially, you're trying to create something, aren't you? You're trying to create something that doesn't even exist right now. And when you are trying to create something that doesn't exist, you've got to understand creativity, because the creative sciences play a huge role in your ability to be able to create or not. And finally, strategy plays out in an uncertain world which interacts with many other players, which essentially means that other players who are business focused, who are human centered, who are challenging assumptions and are being creative, you are competing against those players. So it's a dynamic process. You can't literally predict fixed time set in stone. This is what my strategy will be, do or die. It won't work, because it's a responsive process. The competition is doing its own thing, other inventions are doing their own thing, other countries are doing their own thing. So the whole process of strategy, which we're going to introduce very shortly right now, has to take into account a process that accounts for other people's actions, because that's the world that we essentially live in. So let's look at the strategy map. We are introducing you to two concepts today. One is the strategy map that helps you navigate through the process of strategy setting in an organization. And the second one is a map of choice articulation, which once you've decided on what your possibilities are, will help you navigate the choices that you actually have to make, or the ones that you have to reject to be able to pursue your winning goals. So the strategy map is here. There are 7 stages in this particular strategy map. It's modeled on the principles of design thinking, but it also takes the holistic science or management science of strategy into consideration. And we're introducing you to these 7 steps, which will essentially be able to navigate between the process of setting the strategy. The first step, or the first stage of this strategy, is the stage of problem identification. Now, if you notice the earlier definitions of strategy that we were sharing with you, they talk about ploys and they talk about patterns and they talk about perspectives, and I think a huge insight that's missed out on in terms of setting a strategy is to fundamentally begin with the question that what problem are we trying to solve here? Inadvertently, businesses today assume the problems to be a problem which is essentially a gap between where I ought to be and where I am. That is, I have this goal, I haven't reached there, this is the gap of my aspiration, and that's the problem to be solved. That's really an internal problem to solve. That's really your problem to solve. And if you apply a fundamental common sense to it, I'm not suggesting you do this, but if you apply a fundamental common sense to it, you lose your aspiration, you lose the problem as well. So that's not a problem to solve. So problem identification, why are we strategizing in the first place? What are we going to be able to change in the marketplace? How are we going to impact industry? How are we going to impact the global scenario? What is your problem identification needs to guide the entire strategy, so to say. And problem identification is meant this. Let's take a scenario. Let's take an artificial scenario and see what emerges. And this is really not an artificial scenario because it's happening in the world right now, but let's contextualize it to an industry. You are facing the effects of COVID-19. Sales have taken a hit. People aren't geared up to generate business online, and competitive realities are putting pressure on cost positions. Now, this is a problem that is applicable to each and every business in the globe right now. Let's run with this scenario. Let's take this as a scenario, and if this is the problem that you have identified, strategy needs to begin to answer a solution to this problem, and not in terms of beginning with a 5-year projection or a ploy to counter or outmaneuver competition or a different perspective. No, there is a problem that we are facing. The revenues have dried up. The costs are kind of fixed right now. Sales have taken a hit. People aren't ready to sell online, and business is certainly not moving in competitive realities, being that every other player is facing more or less the similar situation, actually tells us that the cost pressure is going to pile up. So that's the first stage, which is problem identification. And the second stage is about framing intent. Now, framing intent is about converting the problem into a question. Now, let's have a bit of fun with this. Let's apply this to a specific industry, because then I can dive into some specific examples and show you. And let's take an industry that's really in trouble. Let's take the airline industry, for example. So let's say the problem is that the airline industry is obviously facing a no business situation. The passenger flights are not flying. Any problem that you can think on earth is applicable today to the airline industry. So how might we frame it into a question is an answer to this question. How might we continue to win even in the face of crisis, grow our business and minimize the cost pressure? Now, if you examine carefully, what's happened in step 2 of this framework is one has converted the problem into a strategic issue, which poses a question that is the job of essentially the strategy to answer. So how might we continue to win in the crisis or grow our business and minimize the cost pressure? Now, if this is applicable to the airline industry, we move to step 3, which is the stage of searching possibilities. Now, this is the key stage, and you will be able to search possibilities if you have a strategic intent in place as to what are you searching possibilities for. Unfortunately, in the beginning of pandemic, people viewed this as a crisis, and all they searched possibilities for was through a method or was towards a cause of preservation and survival, and not essentially for growth. So they got answers for survival, and now there's only as much as you can survive for. Survival is not a scalable activity, so you gotta grow, and businesses are clueless today because not only they spent 6 months in just surviving, they didn't gear up for growth. That is understandable. They don't have capabilities left today to succeed in these markets. They don't have capabilities to sell virtually. They don't have capabilities to innovate an offering that is in demand. They don't have capabilities to meet the COVID situation because 6 months went in surviving. So it's important to frame the intent so that you're able to focus on the right question for generating possibilities. And this is how you generate strategic possibilities. What creative or disruptive or innovative offerings can you create? Let's apply this to the airline industry, right? In the previous slide, we asked the question, how might we continue to win? So to be able to win, what creative or disruptive or innovative offerings that we can create? Now, instead of preservation, if the intent moves to creating disruptive or innovative offering, for example, in the aircraft industry, in the airline industry, they're not able to take passenger planes anymore because the government regulations have prohibited them from doing so. What can the airline industry do? How can they create a disruption, or how can they create an innovative offering? For example, I read recently that Sydney Qantas airline created a no destination flight. They hovered on an aircraft for 7 hours, ferried passengers from Sydney to Sydney, took them to every destination, every fancy destination in Australia for 30,000 view into those destinations. Now, I am unlikely to board that aircraft to go nowhere, but there are enough weird people. That aircraft was packed. People are sick and tired. Whether it's a good offering or a bad offering, it worked because people got onto it. So how can you create a disruptive offering? Yes, passenger planes are not flying, but there are opportunities in the market today. People around the world are stuck in supply chain. No one is stopping cargo planes to fly. People around the world are struggling with international couriers. People around the world have issues with trucks not plying on the road. People around the world today, the health industry has a major bottleneck coming up. Do you know that the COVID-19 medicines that are created around the world, a majority of them require to be shipped at minus 80 degrees centigrade? And no shipping carrier in the world today is ready for it. And why are the airlines missing the bus? The airlines are missing the bus because they were too focused on preservation, too devoid on just hoarding everything that they have rather than focusing on opportunities that might come that way. And the opportunities are not coming that way because you never ask the question, how might we continue to grow? If you ask the question, how might we continue to grow, you might have identified industries that are in growth phase and got into their problems to solve. And when you got into their problems to solve, they would have told you, the pharmaceutical companies would have told you 3 months back that we would need these kind of shipping supplies to be able to effectively distribute. As things stand, they will all start innovating now. But when they innovate now, all the competition is going to innovate and no one's going to have a strategic advantage. Are you getting the point? To be ahead of the curve, you got to be ahead of the problem. To be ahead of the problem, you got to frame it as a problem much earlier on before everyone else has. Because when everyone else has, there isn't going to be the opportunity to break through anymore. That becomes the norm of the industry, and then you become another Me Too player. And that's what's going to happen to the world. And I urge and implore you, even today, 99.9% of businesses are not asking the question, how might I continue to grow? 99% of human beings are not asking the question, how might I grow out of this crisis? They are asking the question, how might I survive? And survive they will, but that's not a strategic upside, that's not a strategic advantage, that's just survival, and survival is not scalable. Another option to examine strategic possibilities is to move focus from being a big ticket client to smaller firms. Now, a lot of firms prefer to deal with their large customers, focus on the 80-20 rule. In a crisis, thumb rule is do the opposite. If you are focusing on your large customers are more worried about preservation because they have a greater responsibility in terms of number of people they employ and are worried even more than the smaller firms. But the smaller firms are more agile. The smaller firms have an aspirational value, and one of the things that we were suggesting to a consulting firm recently is to move focus from big ticket items to mid-level items, because the larger firms, even if they're in survival mode, they will survive. The smaller firms have a risk of not even surviving, and that is where they need your services the most. So a lot of attention from a large high net worth items can be moved to a smaller firms. And another opportunity is overcome the problem of online selling. This is something that annoys me to the core. 6 months back, the world knew, no matter whether you're educated or not, whether you have experience or not, the moment COVID hit, you knew that you were into virtual meetings. The moment you were into virtual meetings, you knew that the only way to generate business is virtually. Yet, no company that I know of, and I interact with plenty of them, has invested in educating their salespeople to crack the problem of online sales. And I would ask them, why not? You are willing to survive. You are willing to have thousands of people on your payroll. You are willing to pay them salaries. Why would you keep them ineffective? Why wouldn't you teach them a simple thing, how to crack sales, how to crack interactions, how to convert videos into actual revenue? It's a no-brainer, but apparently not. It's been a no-brainer. And yet companies have lost the opportunity, and I would say again, because the strategic framework that they used has been incorrect. And another option, which invariably will come to bite you in the dust if you don't create the right strategic map, is this: you might have to sell the company altogether. And the fourth stage in the strategy process, and this is important really, is what needs to change. Now, one needs to remember something. If there is no change needed, there in fact is no strategy needed, right? Because if you're not going to be changing anything, if your actions are not meant to change something, then you might as well continue to do the same thing. It doesn't really matter, does it? Common sense again. And a critical component of strategic thinking is to be able to identify what needs to change. What conditions are needed for the possibilities to become winning strategies, right? If you are to be successful at the possibility that you have identified, now what conditions are needed, what changes are needed externally or internally for you to make a success out of it? And I will say it again, it's a critical process, because if there is no change needed, that means there is no strategy needed. Then you're doing just an intellectual bullshit exercise. What are the exact changes needed in order to make your group of people successful? For example, if you decided 4 months back that you want to still be successful and turn around and find ways to preserve cash and increase cash flows, then what change is needed? A change that was needed, as I was sharing in the last slide, in this market was to have a sales force who can capitalize on the change scenario in the market. But businesses didn't do it because they didn't ask the question as to what change is needed. Related to the question of what change is needed is the next point in the strategy map as to what are the barriers, what conditions are needed for change that are most uncertain to you, or conditions that you are the most unprepared for. Now, once you have identified that the changes are needed, the biggest or the greatest opportunities are the ones that you're the most unprepared for, because chances are, in conditions of change where you're 80% prepared, people are not going to resist it. Conditions for change that you are 80% certain, people in these times are certainly not going to resist it, because 80% is like a God-sent thing right now. What are the conditions? Where are the bottlenecks in your system? What are the processes? Where are the people issues? Where are the cultural issues? What are the market offering issues? Where you're the least prepared and the most vulnerable? And those barriers, if you crack, you gotta remember this. If you are most unprepared there, so is everybody else. Take it at face value, because everyone's swimming in the same boat today. And if you overcome them, that's your leapfrog, that's your big leap towards the market in creating a strategic positioning which no other firm will be able to catch up on. And it is these players who are able to come up and overcome these barriers that will end up shifting market shares monumentally and phenomenally once this is over. Remember the Kellogg's example. What did they do? They invested in marketing when everyone was preserving. So whose recall was on top of the mind once the conditions left it? Kellogg's captured a lion's share of the market in the last depression. That's an opportunity. Harvard study tells us that market shares always shift in crisis. And who do you think they shift to? They shift to the ones that got prepared to be able to capture on that. And our next stage is about testing. It's about assumptions. Test your assumptions. Don't take it at face value. Identify your conditions, identify your change, identify your possibility, and test everything. Don't assume that it will work in the market. That's the biggest mistake people make. Test your assumptions, try a solution, test again, till you crack a formula at 80% of the time. And that is where you want to get to. Unfortunately, what businesses don't do, as I said earlier, was businesses do not document assumptions that they're making. They document plans, they document budgets, they document projections, they have an MIS for every damn thing, but the most critical thing, which is what was the assumption made to reach that plan? Because what goes wrong in outside when your people implement is not that they're unintelligent to execute the plan, is that the assumption disappeared. You might have set a plan assuming a 40% CAGR over the next 5 years or so, but you didn't plan for COVID. So what's gone wrong is an economic assumption. Now that is a visible one. What goes wrong are cultural assumptions. What goes wrong are people assumptions. What can go wrong are policy assumptions. What can go wrong are disruptions that other people are inventing in their garages. If you have your assumptions in front of you, you'll be able to critically examine them and apply tools of critical thinking so that you have a faster course correction. And a key factor in any successful strategy is not that it was a seamless flight. The key factor is actually that they critically analyzed and intervened at the points where the assumptions were against the actual projections, fix them and move ahead. And that's how the strategy process is emergent. If you remember the slide that we discussed on emergent strategy. And the last part of it, of this particular framework, is to make your choices. a lot of time indecision happens to be your biggest strategy, right? Things that you don't decide on eventually come out to be true and come back to bite you. And decision making is integral to strategy, of course, because the decisions that you take are the ones that are likely to get executed. So make your choices. Bring together the exploration of all the previous 6 steps to choose your strategic possibility. And remember this, that strategy is a matter of choice. That strategy is about choices. We discussed in our definition of strategy, and the definition was this, that strategy is a set of choices you make now to direct the future in order to increase the probability that you will win now and into the future. And in that process, in this manner, making choices is a key to strategy. So this is our first part of the framework, where we spoke about identifying a problem, converting that problem into really an intent statement, into a burning question that your strategy must answer, because otherwise you'll answer the wrong question and it will lead to a strategy which is a completely solving the imprecise or the incorrect problem. You don't want to solve the incorrect problem, you want to solve the right problem. So identifying the problem, framing the intent or converting that problem into a question that enables you to search possibilities. While you're searching possibilities, it could be in the area of innovation, it could be in the area of a different market, white spaces, customers, whatever it is. And from that opportunity to identify what really needs to change. And for me, it's a critical question where most businesses fail at, because they want to follow a path of least resistance and reach a path of strategic brilliance. If nothing needs to change, then you don't need a strategy. So what needs to change? What needs to change internally? What needs to change externally? What are your barriers in creating that change? What are the assumptions we are making about overcoming the barriers, about the change, about the possibility, about the problem, about the question? And as a result, what decision or what specific choices are we going to make in order to create this strategy now? And that brings us to choice articulation, and this stage is important to be looked at in conjunction with the framework, because a lot of time we confuse strategy just with what kind of options or ploys or plans or patterns that we have. It's an important part of strategy, but in my mind, or in following the design thinking philosophy, so to say, the choices need to be the next step after having identified the possibility and what changes are needed. And we've created a choice cascade map, so to say, to be able to make it easier for you when you go back onto the drawing room in discussing these frameworks, or going back to your boardrooms and discussing these frameworks, to help you identify exactly 5 set of choices that you need to make to be able to put any strategy into action. So the choice cascade, or the strategic choice articulation, is around these 5 stages. The first of which is to be able to decide, what are you really winning at? That is a question, what do you want to win? So for some organization, it happens to be that they might want the highest market share. For some organizations might want the fastest growth, or organizations might want to excel and be the best customer service orientation in the whole world. It's important to know from your framework, or from your possibility framework, as to what is it that your end result is. What are you wanting to be winning at? Is it the growth for you? Is it your market shares? Is it your customer service? Is it to create disruption? Is it to create innovation? Is it to be the best in the world at something? What is it that your ultimate goal is in exploring the possibility? And then comes the question on where to play. And this is essentially about figuring out 5 choices, which is around geography. Where is your playing field? Which geography is it? Which continent is it? Which country is it? Or what market is it? What demographic it is? What kind of customers do you attract or not attract? What kind of profiles fit into your customer? Who is your customer? Who is not your customer? What are the assumptions we are making? What are the channels we will use to reach those customers? And the critical input that it needs to go into is, after having done all of that, what specific offers are going to interest this customer? And I think this is a question which the world today hasn't answered in their businesses, because the market conditions have changed, the customer outlook have changed, everything else might have remained the same, but the channels have changed. And the traditional offer mechanism that worked in February 2020 certainly stopped working in April 2020. The biggest innovation, and I've been saying this since April's webinar, the biggest innovation or the biggest possibility that businesses needed to think was to be able to rejig their offers to serve the market, because the market interest, the market foresight, or the market perception has changed. It's not that they don't need the product, they don't need it in the same packaging. So what are the offers and what are going to be your focus stages? By focus stages, we mean by deciding or making the choice that this is what we are great at, right? Every company has a certain strength. Your organization or you as an individual have a certain strength. This is what I'm great at. This is what I'm not great at, but still needs to be done. So what is it that we're going to do in-house? What is it that we're going to focus on being the best at? And what is it that we're not going to focus on and can be outsourced or can be let go of or can be done by somebody else who actually can be great at that? The next choice cascade or the next articulation is about how to win. Now, Porter long back differentiated between two strategies that a firm can either pursue a strategy of differentiation, that is being different, or it can pursue a strategy of being a market leader in terms of cost. You can either play niche or play mass. It's the ones who play in the middle that land nowhere. So how to win? What is going to be your strategy? What does your business model need? Does your business model need differentiation? And there's a good way to think about it. You have to understand where your industry is. Is your industry full of competitors and there is a high cost pressure? Then the only way out is differentiation. Is your industry highly innovative and everyone is doing different things? Then the bottom of the pyramid most likely is left unanswered, and there can be a possibility of cost leadership out there. So it's important to understand where you are. What kind of a product do you have? It doesn't have to be an innovative industry or an industrial industry. It has to be determined by market reality. Is the market saturated for you? Then the way out is differentiation. Is the market flooded with players? Then the way out is differentiation. Is the market highly innovative like the mobile phone market? Then a lot of players acquire the market based on cost leadership. So where are you? And what are your strengths? What do you enjoy doing? Are you going to be following a process of creating something different, which means being creative, 12 months in a year and coming up with added value so that you beat the cost curve? Or are you great at accounting systems, and are you great at processes, and are you excellent at defining all the things in nitty-gritties, and are you a real micro level thinker? Then the benefit that you might have for your organization might be in the playing field of cost leadership. So how are you going to win? And the next choice cascade is about capabilities. Now, about capabilities, before I move to the slide, I want you to remember this, that it's the most ignored area of setting strategy. Strategy or business or achievement is a human-focused effort. Now, there's no debate on that, right? That without the efforts of human beings, no strategy is getting executed. It's a human-focused effort. It's a human-led effort. It's a human-led effort where leaders are leading other human beings. And yet, in any strategic plan that you see within your organization, it will not talk about capabilities. And the problem with that is this: if you don't have a set of capabilities that are unique to you, you will not have a strategy that is unique to you or the one that will make you win. So a key element or a key question to get into is this: what are the capabilities that you need to be able to differentiate or to be able to achieve a cost leadership? What are the capabilities that you need today to examine the possibilities itself, to examine the change, to create that change, to leverage on that change, to overcome the barriers, to challenge the assumptions so that you're able to arrive at the decisions where you're at least 80% certain that you have a chance to win? What are the capabilities that you currently don't have? What are the capabilities that you can acquire? What are the capabilities that you can train your people to do? But it's an essential element in the whole literature, the academic science of innovation, in the whole academic science of creativity. They talk about dynamic capabilities, creating a set of capabilities within an organization that can focus on the future while preserving the current. It's not just have the capability to do one thing, but create a dynamic set to be able to create a strategy that can have a greater probability to win. And the last cascade, or the last choice cascade, is about systems and processes, or management systems and processes, and it's about this: infrastructure, systems, metrics, including culture and processes that support and measure the strategy. So what are the systems and processes that are needed in this cascade are at the bottom of it after one has been able to answer the question that what are you winning at is your first choice cascade: where to play, which geography to play, how to win, what is going to be your mechanism, is it differentiation, is it leadership, what are the capabilities you need to be able to encash on that mechanism, and what systems and processes which are specifically, what are your metrics for success? How are you gauging people? Peter Drucker once said that all strategy fails at two reasons. One, how do you reward people, and how do you punish people? And that's the metrics. That's what decides and communicates to people what your culture is. Your culture decides what your enablement or execution will be, and your processes and systems are aimed at supporting the culture that you really need versus having a process that makes your life easier. So this is the choice cascade in conjunction with the strategy map. The strategy map is about figuring out what problem you're trying to solve, how are you trying to solve it, what are your possibilities, change and barriers and assumptions, so that you're able to make a decision. Once you've identified your possibilities, you move into choice articulation as to what are you winning at, where are you going to play, how are you going to win, who or what kind of people are going to make you win, and what are the systems and processes that you're going to enable them by in order to be actually able to win. And finally, it brings me to the stage, which is the last part of this presentation today before we move into Q&A, which is about strategy being a creative act. Now, strategy is a creative act. As I said earlier in the presentation, you are trying to create something in the world of your business or your personal life that doesn't exist. And that's why you need a strategy in the first place. Now, when you're trying to create something, you're in the creation zone, and that essentially makes strategy a creative act. It's an aspect of strategy that hasn't been discussed much, nor it's been written about, nor it's been written in any book as such that I know of. It happens to be a dear subject to me, the parallels between strategic thinking and creativity. I happen to be writing a whole PhD thesis in this, by the way, and one of the key elements of our research, we've studied the 4 largest leading companies on earth, where we've done experimental studies, and we have unearthed a direct correlation between your creative input or your creative intent and your actual strategic outcome at the end of 3, 5, 10, 20 years. There's a direct correlation between your ability to be creative and your ability to maximize a strategic output. Whatever your creative input is actually going to determine what your eventual strategic outcome is. And there's a logical reason for it. You will start implementing a certain strategy, reach some sort of a bottleneck somewhere or the other. Now, the ability to come out of that bottleneck depends upon your creative maneuverability or your creative agility available in the system. You are going on a path of success and you see a roadblock, right? We see a roadblock called COVID right now. Now, our ability to whether go into a shell from that roadblock or to figure it head on solely determines, are we able to come up with a creative response that we are convinced will work or not. So if you have a creative response which you are convinced about, of course you will take it. It's the lack of imagination and the lack of creative response that force people into preservation mode or survival modes. And survival modes do not win. If a team is playing not to lose, it will eventually lose. If a business is playing not to lose, it will lose. If a country is defending itself to not lose, it will lose. That's the way the mechanics of the things work, because there are people who are always playing to win. So they might lose on a bad day, but over the 10-year or a 20-year cycle, it's the players who are wanting to win are the ones who will win. It's the cultures who are designed to win are the ones who will win. And winning depends a lot on creative inputs. Even in a game of sports, for example, let's say you'll come up with a situation which is unplanned. Now it needs a creative response to come out of it. And business is no different. And unfortunately, creativity in business is considered something of a rebellion behavior. We look at creative people like outcasts or something, or someone who does not have business sense. It's not true. You need creativity to be able to have a strategic success, because strategy, in the very definition of it, making choices to create a new reality, is the same as creativity, wherein you're doing something to create something novel and useful. The aim of strategic thinking or strategic plans is, of course, to create something novel and useful for your business, for your life, for your families, for your homes. And that is a creative act, that's a creative process. So strategy is a creative act, and I think when we're talking about strategy as a creative act, in this last segment, what I implore you to remember is this: that a creative act is not certain, right? A creative act is not predictable, and therefore the creative act needs a lot of openness. And similarly, strategic thinking or strategic setting also needs a lot of openness. If you've gotten rigid about how you define strategy, if you've gotten rigid about what strategy means to you, then you're out of the creative process. So it needs a bit of openness to examine unconsidered realities. It needs openness to go beyond your traditional definitions of strategy, of thinking them as plans and ploys and whatnot, to be examining it as a problem, because creativity begins with a perception of a problem. So strategy in our framework begins with the perception of a problem, and when you perceive a problem that others haven't, you already have begun on a journey of a strategic upside or a competitive advantage. So understand strategy as a creative act. I could go on explaining this and take another hour, but I am interested in getting to the other side and answering your questions. But I want you to remember this: that strategy as a creative act means that the process of strategy is trying to create something that does not exist, and that cannot happen in a rigid framework. It can happen in a creative framework. So finally, just to summarize, this was the two frameworks that we discussed: the strategy map on one side, and then the choice articulation to help you go through the process of what you want to articulate. And lastly, we discussed that strategy is a creative act. And now we are ready for your Q&A or for the questions. Please feel free to directly start typing your questions in the chat box. We are right here to answer them all the way through. Don't hold back, whether it's a question about the strategy framework, whether it's a question about a concept that we discussed, or whether it's a question on how you implement this in your organization or any specific situation that you want to discuss. Please feel free to type it. We'll try to take as many questions as we can. See you right now on the other side.
Hello and welcome. My name is Roli, and I'm here to slightly summarize what we saw in the webinar. Meanwhile, Chetan is joining us, and then is when we will be taking your questions. So, as far as the strategy webinar, I think what personally stayed with me was the statement that a strategy is a creative act. And therefore, when the steps about making that strategy, the steps about choice articulation, I think two clear takeaways which stayed with me personally were: one, about the barriers, about what actually is it that needs to change, and therefore identifying the right kind of change. And that's where, in my thought, I was quite alive to it, seeing all the way, we do all these strategy meetings, that actually what we end up doing is that we in our head make a strategy and then want to change what do we need to change to meet that strategy, rather than approaching a strategy with that model as to what do I need to change for exploring the possibilities that I have laid out. And another point which stuck with me was in the choice articulation map, where the human quotient, the human angle of it, that actually how important it is to have those kind of capabilities which can challenge you, which can question assumptions, which can open the avenues of possibilities. Because making projections and making plans, of course, is required, but that's only one kind of intelligence that's there on the table. But actually to look beyond and look over and above what's there and challenge out of that, certainly requires a capability framework. So let's hear your thoughts, let's hear your comments, and let's hear your questions also on building this up together. And I'm joined by Chetan. Chetan, we can have two bits from you and then move to audience questions and stuff like that. Chetan, I think, will you please check your audio? We are getting from the audience that the audio is not audible. If you can just recheck that once. Meanwhile, yeah, just to build further on what Chetan was saying as he's checking his settings at this point in time, is strategy more, I mean, it's things like innovation, things like strategy. I would say they are so debated and so misunderstood and so words which are understood so much in varied forms that everyone has a different meaning, that everyone has a different approach to it. And I think the audio problem is still there. So I'll just pause it for a moment.
Don't pause.
Okay.
Just
So could be, I mean, I'm sure the audio glitch is going to get over in a minute. So the whole thing here being that a strategy being understood so differently most of the times, as you know, if you recall the definition of strategy that we said in the webinar, it's more often a pattern, a plan that you are just wanting to do, a projection about a short-term goal or a long-term goal. Well, all that is a portion that you need to go through. But is it really the strategy of the organization? Is it really what actually is making an strategic organization? And another point here that I want to bring, to notice is that what are your informed and uninformed choices that you are making? What are those strategic anchors that are there in the process which are taking all of this strategy together? So these are some of the thoughts that I am wanting to stay with, and I am inviting you to think about that strategy. Is it something that is just telling you what next, or is it something that's actually building for you what next? So one was about what could be done to make an interior designer and an architect kind of a business more strategic. I mean, get more work. So I kind of stayed with that word of get more work, but I understand probably the intent is to put them to best use. And I think these are all assumed to be creative fields, and therefore there is actually so much that can be done as long as you can creatively think about what is a bigger problem that you are trying to solve. Is it about them equipping them with everything? Is it about taking more tasks from them, or is it about that you with your team of architects and interior designers wanting to create something that is an answer for today's problem? So it is something like that. I mean, it could be about redesigning office spaces, it could be about redesigning utility spaces, redesigning restaurants, redesigning your social interaction platforms. There is so much for interior designers and architects that certainly meets to my idea somehow as I hear you say this. And as long as, I would again say, repeat, that as long as there is a problem that you are trying to answer, I think you'll be able to arrive at it as to how to put that team.
right. I don't know whether my audio is audible because I'm still not. able to gauge by that. But I think also from an architect perspective, really, what needs to be pointed out is to solve a different problem. So don't call it interior design, call it interior re-engineering or something. How do you make a space more viable? How do you solve a problem that people have related to space, which is not just limited to aesthetics? I think the interior design business has kind of saturated itself in the competitive landscape by just relating it to aesthetics and beauty and stuff. Whereas in developed countries, a lot of businesses have moved to interior engineering, where they're helping you uh, take the space into a different level. So, how can you create a different value addition by making 1,000 square feet seem like 2,000 square feet? And I think that is something that's going to be a differentiator, especially in these times when the focus is on economy and the focus is on scale. Even for offices and even for commercial spaces, I think that's a value addition statement, that how can you get people much more out of what they already have? And that's a strategic upside there.
Yeah, well said. And as you know, I'm sure the audio is back now because that's the response that I'm getting from the audience. And our team is there to support you. And sorry for the little bit of glitch that you might have had. And as we were discussing, Chetan, a very interesting one popped on my screen saying about cost differentiation, especially when you are dealing with multiple products, you know.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I want to relate that answer to the framework that was there in your choice articulation part, where we talked about cost and differentiation. So as far as differentiation, what you need to analyze for that product would be that is it about a niche market? Is it about that wherever that product and whatever it is getting used for, is it niche and it has uniqueness in its own way? Or it is about cost leadership that you would need to do. So if there are, entry barriers to what you're operating for, if there are less players into what you're operating for, and if there are those kind of avenues available to you, certainly it's about a differentiation. And if you are at the life cycle stage of a product being towards the tail end, or it's like a low entry barrier market or something like that, it will be about operational efficiency and about cost leadership. So
Right.
that would be the right way to
Right, and
analyze
there's a
it
question,
eventually.
how does it relate to the risk appetite, or how do you correlate it to the risk appetite? I think you don't need to correlate it with the risk appetite. You need to figure out, first thing is, what's the problem you're solving, right? And where you are solving the problem, there is a possibility. Once there is a possibility, there are choices to be made, and I think risk comes after that, right? Risk is about management of risk. Risk is not about analyzing the risk and therefore deciding the possibility. I think risk is a stage after the possibility. And this is where we were saying, far too often risk is analyzed on an Excel sheet and decisions are made. Risk is a direct function of capability, right? If you have the capability to execute what's there in your possibility framework, then there is no risk. If you don't have the capability, there is a risk, and the answer is to get the capability. Answer is not to reject the strategy. So whether you get it by yourself or whether you get it through somebody else or your team members get it, that's the reason I think for Ad management says that hire the capabilities that you don't have, because that mitigates the risk in itself. How do you propose individuals practicing freelancers in COVID situation don't get sucked into the strategy of cost, which is the next question, and we shall take that also. Don't get sucked into cost as your modus operandi. Get into differentiation. People are going to buy value today. They're not going to buy cost today. So, how do you differentiate from the value of established companies, so to say, and bring it into your freelancing? So, if you can give us more details as to what exactly you do, I could give you a more specific answer. But the idea is to differentiate, be in front of people, whether you're getting paid or not. It's time to get your brand recognized, so build a brand around it and then differentiate on value. Don't get sucked into the cost debate that you got to be the cheapest if you're alone. No, if you're alone, you're a specialist and you got to be the most expensive.
So, both these things, Chetan, that you talked about, whether it is about being a specialist or before that about bringing in capabilities, again, it's a reinforcement of how important the human angle is, how important that differentiation that you bring to the table as a person, as a professional, and that is what is, determinant of what will sail you through it. And
Right. Right.
that's where, most of the times we hear talks about diverse teams and building people who are unrelated into cross functional teams, but reality is that, if that was to happen, probably strategy would have a very different approach than what we normally hear today in boardrooms. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah, right. And I think the next question, which is this one, can we talk about cost and differentiation? I don't know what really you want to know about this, but I think, look, people confuse whether they want to pursue a cost strategy and a differentiation strategy. It's not the same. And I think what most businesses end up into a trap is they pursue a cost strategy and then want to find differentiation as a way to get out of it. Now, that's not the right approach because both have their merits. It's not that one is wrong and the other is right. Indigo pursues a cost strategy and there's nothing wrong with it. That itself is a differentiation. And I think what the other airlines messed up is when they were in the business of differentiation, they started chasing cost strategies. And by confusing their whole system, they eventually shut down. Right? So decide very early on, what is it? Are you having the skill set of creating differentiation, disruption, innovation, creativity in the market? Or are you having the skill set to really economize an operation and have a cost benefit to the consumer? And that's the key difference. Don't pursue both because you don't have to, right? You either come up with a product that's better than anyone else, and it could be a niche market for you, but you get paid more, or you come up with something that you have the best method of producing something, so you cost the least. So don't confuse it. It's when we confuse the two, you don't know which capability to hire as well.
And most of the time, Chetan, what you say, this is what exactly we see when competition starts with a Me Too kind of a model or a strategy. That while they have an edge somewhere, but they see the market shaping in a particular way, and a follow up starts to happen. So what you said rightly reminds me that that differentiation could come from cost, could come from your product, or could come from your services offering. So decide for yourself which is a lever that you want to use, and then build your strategic framework around it,
Absolutely.
rather than just because it is there, you need to kind of tap into it and then become another offering in that list of so many people,
Right,
right?
right, yeah.
Oh,
There's
someone
a,
from the tourism
yeah,
industry
it's come
is
again, yeah.
writing to us that the person is from tourism industry, and of course there has been a demand shift, and we've seen that it's from fine dinings to deliveries to safety and hygiene becoming the more important thing. And I think that's where, sir, for you, while I know this sector has taken a hit, but having that in mind is still what I would want to say, that whenever and as things are starting to open up, there is a very of opportunity that is opening up. As long as you're able to make that shift, as long as you're able to change yourself to the possibility that you're able to address to people's concerns of safety and hygiene and still give them that experience and that food or whatever experience you are offering, I think there is always a way forward to it. So
Also, yeah, tourism is on a bit of a standstill. So we understand the concern and the question that in the tourism industry, I'm just trying to locate the question, but it's led to a bit of a standstill. Would you say that there is a demand shift? And yes, there is a demand shift, but it's not disappeared, right? It's a temporary demand shift. We can't assume this situation to be forever. If you're talking with respect to restaurants and stuff, I think there is a case to assume that the COVID situation or the fear related to it will last a while longer. Now, club that with the earlier question on architecture. How can you create a restaurant or an interior design where you take away the COVID situation? And that's an opportunity because restaurants need to get ready for it or they need to get out of business. Right, delivery is one method for sure. Sooner or later, people want to go out. Can I walk into your restaurant where everything is taken care of and I'm sitting there and that's your interior design answer? Can you rejig restaurants in a manner that takes away the COVID scare? And that's what the design that's needed. It doesn't have to look pretty, it has to be functional.
So I think the person who was asking us about the design and the interior designer should really get in touch with this gentleman, and you both together can create something win-win for each other. So
Yeah, yeah, I think so. I think that's an opportunity in the interior design market. That's actually an opportunity in the entire public space market. That's the opportunity in cinema halls. Can you think of a way to get people seated there without having the fear of who's sneezing on the next chair? And that's your
So
opportunity, and that's the huge industry internationally.
true, true.
Yeah.
And I would want to bring back attention and the liver of this particular discussion to something that we were reiterating. These solutions would come. These solutions would eventually, you will be able to figure out a way. The important part here is, are you willing to look beyond the realm of possibilities that have existed for you and look beyond them and create the new ones for yourself? Is there a problem solving lens to it, or is there a solution or a crisis lens to it? Is it that you are wanting to change whatever defined traditionally your business? If you are wanting to change and you have been able to identify that change, sooner or later it will land at the right place. So the bigger question is not about immediately finding a solution, but more about, in that process of making a choice, where is it that you are focusing more?
Also,
Are
there
you,
are a lot of
yeah.
concerns really on people that there is no industry demand and stuff. Now, what we were trying to explain in the framework, that take that problem and convert it into a question. That there is no industry demand. So how do I generate demand for my business is your strategy question. And that's the purpose of the strategy. So your strategy can't be that there is demand and so I will go and serve it. That's like a no-brainer. Of course, if there's demand and people are asking for you, you'll have business. But the problem today is that there is no demand, and that problem tells us that that's a problem to solve. Now, how will you create the demand? You will either differentiate, or you will compete on price, or you'll come up with some sort of an innovation, and that's where those steps of the process that we laid out in the earlier slides come in handy. Convert it into a problem, generate your possibilities, test them out, figure out what's the change needed. There is no demand is an obvious problem, but people have kind of accepted that because there's no demand, business will be low. That to me should not be a direct correlation, right? Because even in the best of demands, even in the best of economies, there are businesses who don't grow, and even in the worst of economies, there'll be businesses who will grow. So it's not a direct correlation that demand is there and so I will do well or not do well. There's a question which says that we need to have a business strategy for all season, all weather. How do you explain? I think what you need is the ability to be able to be agile and be thinking creatively so that your imagination is alive. Things will change, right? Like COVID has happened, things will change. What's not happened is businesses have not had minds who have progressed at the speed which is as fast as the speed of change. So they've kind of frozen, and the change is happening outside. And now they're waiting for the government to intervene or someone to intervene, and somewhere magically the situation to disappear or the medicine to come. None of that is happening. And the business is sliding. And the only thing that's not keeping up pace with COVID is our imagination. And that's really sad.
Well said. So true. The next step we have is, do you think starting online business is risky or not? So business comes with its pro and cons. I can't comment until I know what kind of a business you're referring to. But as far as online medium, I think there is no denying that it's here to stay. Whether it is about this COVID pandemic scenario or it is after that, this change that has happened because of this crisis is not a change that will go away once the crisis is over. And that is where somewhere during the webinar we had laid this emphasis on, that why are you not training your people to those virtual mediums? Why is it that organizations are shying away from investing into online portals and online models? And I'm sure they would be doing their bit, but this is what is going to be the future, because people have adapted to it. They have understood how to conserve time and energy by doing it, plus the ease of access. So this is here to say, if you have something that you really can build online, it should have happened as of yesterday. That is what online model would be.
Right, and online or offline, I think what you need to don't label businesses as online or offline. What you really need to decide is what your business model is and what fits in. So, are you offering a product and service that makes more sense online? If yes, by all means, online. It's not risky. If you are offering a business model that does not make sense online, for example, you are offering high-end management consulting. It might not make sense online currently because the world isn't ready for it. It's already risky. But if you need reach, if you need to reach people that you can't reach offline, if you are working on that kind of a business model, then online's the answer for you. It's not risky at all. So risk is a function of your business model, not a function of online or offline.
Yeah, and to build from there, risk being a function of business model, yes, and risk mitigation or risk handling or risk appetite happens to be a function of your capabilities, happens
Absolutely.
to be the function of the possibility framework that you are wanting to chase, happens to be a function of how well you have handled the assumptions in that strategic process and in that strategic map that you're trying to lay for yourself. So that focus on human competencies, on those capabilities, on those aspects which look softer, but trust you me, they are the plinth stone whereby which actually hold the whole process together.
So we have, I think, a follow-up question that I am a freelance designer and I want to stick the. So it's fine. This is what you really want to do, and you should be doing what you want to do. But I would say that with regard to the business, instead of answering it as I want to stick to this and I want to do this or that, what does your customer want from you, right? And the second question is, even if you stick to this, what is the value addition to the customer? Answer that question for yourself, because in the end, people will be buying some value. Now, whether you stick to creative ventures or whether you stick to operational execution ventures, what's your value addition? If you know your value addition, then you have to figure out a way to sell it or not to sell it. But I think don't predefine it that my business will only be a creative one. In current times, the understanding of what is creative might be slightly different. It might not be related to design and aesthetics, it might be related to more on space management. So creativity can be applied anywhere. What is the value addition is what we would really want you to think about, right? What value do you add to your client, and how do you now monetize that value?
And slightly building on what Chetan you said about creativity, I think all these people who I appreciate that creative sense that you are coming from, but creativity is about creating that novelty as well as that utility. So what Chetan said, that as long as whether it is about space, whether it is about increasing the functionality, as long as you are able to either enhance the novelty aspect of it, which you are doing through your designs already, through your creations, through your aesthetic element of it, and if you can multiply it with your utilitarian aspect of it and create that combination in a manner which is unique, I think that is what the market might be looking for at this point in time.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I think
Yeah, I don't think we have more
this should
questions
be,
right now. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, these are the questions that we have. And next week we will be right here for our Ideas Live, whereby we'll be answering your questions for your businesses, for your concern areas, for the possibilities that you want to build with us. Till then, see you
Yeah.
next week. Chetan, over to you.
Yeah, so next week, I think it's like the part two of this, where now we can get into specific advice for any specific situations that you guys need. So come up with your business ideas or come up with any business problems that you stuck. We will try our best to apply what we introduced today to your situations and try and give you the solutions right there and then. So that's next Thursday. The link's on the chat. So see you then, and thank you all for being here.
Thank you.